Lab 4 was an interesting one. I thought kind of creative, but also challenging. And I'll play mine to remind you that this was the digital popcorn lab where you're randomizing objects. You're also learning that the things inside the code, inside draw, is looping automatically. Things you put in setup only run once, but part of P5 is that draw just loops all by itself. That way I can define something like a circle and have it vary. But we needed to think a little bit about how to do things like randomizing the position, randomizing the color. Go ahead, stop mine. And I got the most questions from people who were working on this about color. And I think it's just because the drills talked about random, but they didn't give examples using color. The drills showed more about doing things like changing position using random. So I think that was a little easier for folks. So I want to focus in this little recording on the color aspect. And I was interested in seeing that there was more than one approach that people found. There's not always just one solution while coding. But I'll kind of start with my logic. And the way I thought about it is I asked myself first, how do you specify color at all when we're working here? And it made me think about fill, that we use the fill function. And then in the parentheses, we can specify color like white, red, hex values, RGB values. And I think what's interesting there is that you can specify the color so many different ways. I decided that it would be easiest to work with numeric values to help me randomize it. And I thought using RGB syntax would be the easiest because it would give me 3 values to work with for red, green, and blue, as opposed to something like named colors or even hex values. So it seemed like an easier approach to me. Line 27 is where I'm actually specifying the fill color for a square. And by the way, I have a circle also, so there's a fill color down on line 39 also, and it's drawing the circle below there. But if we could focus on the square version, I have fill, and then the parentheses, and then the syntax is its red value, comma, green, comma, and then blue. It's RGB. And I want to remind you that the values can range from 0 to 255. So kind of starting with that thinking, I worked out from there. I thought, well, I could create variables. And I started to realize I need a variable for each color, for red, green, and blue. So I'll create 3 different variables, and then I can randomize the values. So back up at the top is where my variables are created. It looks like there's a ton of them, but to get oriented, the first set, lines 1 through 6, are for my square, and then I had created a second object, a circle. So I then have a whole nother set of variables that are for the other object to help sort it out. Like I named it popcorn 2x for the second object. In the first set of variables, the first 2 are going to be used for x and y position, and then I created one to vary the size of the objects. And I'm just giving them initial values at the top and planning on substituting it with a random value down under draw. So initially, I've just given them again initial values. And right here are the variables I was planning on using for color. You could name these variables what you like. I decided PC1, thinking like popcorn color 1, popcorn 2. Maybe a naming variation on RGB could also be good, something like that. But those were my variable names. And then if you move down into draw, here's where I am redefining it. I have PC1, 2, and 3 on lines 23, 24, and 25. And this is where I'm specifying that I am using the random function, and I'm letting it vary in value from a minimum of 0 to 255 for red, green, and blue. And I basically decided to allow a full maximum range of colors. I can play it again. I'm allowing the full spectrum of RGB, but you can also have fun with that. For example, if you want to limit it to pastel colors, those would be higher numbers. If it's more light, it's a lighter color. So just for example, I don't have to go from 0. What if I said I'm allowed to go from 200 to 255 as a different example? And then when I run that, you can see the color of the squares are now all pastels. So go ahead and stop that. And other people who did play with this and also played with things like, what if it was more green, than red? So they started to vary the different values for red, green, and blue individually to kind of create a color scheme or a certain spectrum. So that was kind of fun to play with. So that's how I randomize color. And I hope it helps to just see the example and kind of talk through the solution at the same time. And I'll just show one other approach that is interesting to randomize colors. This is Chriselle Coe's solution. I made a copy of hers. And when we play it, hers is randomizing color, but it's within a certain range. It looks like maybe there's a set number of colors being used. And I just want to point out that she's using what's called an array, where in the brackets, it's giving it a series of possible values. So it's a little different setup. Like down here, she's allowing salmon, purple, or khaki. And it is randomly switching from those series of options. And this is called an array when you create a list of options. In this object, she's using, for the square, she's allowing salmon, purple, or khaki. And then for her circle, she's allowing pink, blue, or yellow. So that's a different approach that is still allowing some random variation, but it's within a range, which is sort of interesting. You can also see that part of it is saying random and then just referencing circle colors, the name of the variable. And the variable itself is defined as having an array. So that's kind of an interesting alternative solution to randomizing colors. So good job, Chriselle.